Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum. Welcome to 2nd Chronicles, chapter 21, in which there are 20 verses, beginning in verse 2, Judah versus Israel. A significant difference there. King of Judah, or was he king of Israel? Verse 3, many gifts versus great gifts. So it's quantity versus quality. Arms, which is weapons, versus precious things, which could be valuable items, not necessarily weapons. Verse 4, entered upon his kingdom versus was risen up to the kingdom. The footnote reads in the Greek, rose up into. So the Masoretic actually is closer, or at least the English translation of that. Verse 7, there's an omission of the word utterly, as it is associated to the word destroy. And then it says, he said to him that he would give a light versus promise to give. That seems to be a common difference throughout the both texts, where Hashem would speak, but it would say promised in the Masoretic. Verse 9, cavalry versus chariots. There's an omission of, and the people fled to their tents. That's an interesting, fascinating omission in regards to the narrative. What actually occurred, they did flee to their tents. So that was omitted from the record. In the Masoretic, verse 11, cities versus mountains. So why is this important? Because he built the high places not in some remote place in the wilderness where nobody lived or frequented, but in the midst of their community and habitations, in the middle of their cities, or at least in the cities. And then it says here, if I should say this word, but whoring versus fornication. And you'll see that throughout this chapter, that continuous difference. And that word in the Hebrew is zana, which means adultery. It could mean idolatry as well. Another alternate definition is prostitute, and lastly, unfaithful. Verse 16. And those who bordered on the Ethiopians versus the Arabians that were near the Ethiopians. So it seems to be a third group that was stirred up by Hashem, the Philistines, the Arabians, and a third group who bordered on the Ethiopians, whereas the Masoretic lumps the Arabians together with saying that the Arabians are the ones who are near the Ethiopians. Verse 17, went up against Judah versus they came up into Judah. So one is an enemy, one is simply going in, invading, perhaps visiting. We know it's not visiting, but it's not a malicious intent yet, at least in the narrative. And then it says they prevailed against them, so they won. They had a victory versus Judah, versus broke into it or break into it. So they invaded, but did not necessarily win. It's not explicitly expressed. There's an omission of his daughters, but it is in fact replaced with his wives. And then the name of his son is Ahaziah in the Septuagint versus Yehoahaz in the Masoretic. He's the youngest of his sons, which in the Greek, the footnote reads, the least of his sons. So that's interesting. Maybe least important to him. Verse 19, and it continued from day to day, verses, and it came to pass. So we can see it didn't just happen suddenly. This was a continuous daily disease, a chronic disease that he suffered from. And when the time of the days came to 2 years, so when it reached 2 years, this disease process versus that in process of time after the end of 2 years, similarly rendered, he died by a grievous distemper versus, so he died of sore diseases, and that word is disease or sickness. So it's more of a difference of the translators. And a significant difference, I have to mention this again because this is the second time we're mentioning this, but there was no funeral versus no burning. And that word in the Hebrew is 8316 serafa, which is a cremation or burning, which is not what happened. They culturally did not do this back then, or even today in the Jewish religion, they do not do cremation as part of their faith and their cultural practices. After someone dies, they have a carrying out of a corpse to burial and many other cultural practices and rituals after someone dies. But they did not do cremation. They did, however, have a funeral. And the Greek word, there's no Greek entry for it. I can't remember the Greek word offhand, but the English translation of it is carrying out a corpse to burial, essentially. Um, if anyone else has other ideas on that, please comment. What do you think that word means in the original Greek for funeral, specifically in the Septuagint? Lastly, verse 20, we read here, without honor, he died, he departed without honor, versus without being desired. So it's not that he wasn't desired, he was desired by his wives, perhaps, but he did not have honor because of the way he lived, and Hashem ensured that his memory was not commemorated in the same way as his father's were, with honor and great ballyhoo, with a big funeral, a grand funeral. And the word is chemda, which is desire, which is desirable. Pleasant, precious, delight. So that is wrong. No, it's without honor, as we read in the Septuagint. So that's all for this chapter. Thank you very much for your time. Until next time, I bid you all shalom alechem, assalamu alaikum, irini mazisu, pax vobiscum, peace be unto you, and maranatha.